In the dead of night, when the city was asleep and the streets were empty, a lone figure moved through the darkness. The glow of the streetlights barely reached the shadows where he walked, his steps slow, deliberate. He wore an old jacket, the collar turned up against the cold, and his hands were buried deep in his pockets. Anyone who saw him might not have given him a second glance. Just another man, out late. But there was something different about him. Something heavy in the way he carried himself, something in his eyes that held stories too painful to tell. A few feet away, inside a sleek black car parked near the cemetery gates, another man watched. He was dressed sharply, his expensive suit crisp even at this hour. A luxury watch gleamed on his wrist, catching the faint light from a nearby lamppost. He wasn't supposed to be here, but something had pulled him down this road. Something had made him stop. And now, as he sat in the comfort of his car, he found himself staring at the figure stepping into the cemetery, unable to look away. The man in the suit was a millionaire, successful, powerful, the kind of person who had everything. Yet, as he watched the mysterious visitor, he felt a strange unease settle over him. He wasn't the type to let curiosity get the better of him. He was used to controlling every aspect of his life. But there was something about the way this man moved, the way he hesitated at the cemetery entrance, that made him stay. The former prisoner, because that's what he was, though few would have known it just by looking at him, paused at the gates. His fingers curled around the iron bars as if gathering the courage to step forward. He took a deep breath, then entered, the weight of his past trailing behind him like a shadow. The millionaire leaned forward, his pulse quickening. What was a man like that doing here at this hour? Was he mourning someone? Hiding from something? Or was this something else entirely? The ex-prisoner walked deeper into the cemetery, his feet crunching softly against the gravel path. He seemed to know exactly where he was going, never hesitating, never looking around. The only sound was the distant rustling of the trees, the whisper of the wind through the branches. And then he stopped. The millionaire's breath caught as he watched the man kneel in front of a grave. The way he bowed his head, the way his shoulders trembled, it was grief, raw and unfiltered. But it was more than that. There was something deeper, something that sent a chill down the millionaire's spine. From his car, he couldn't see the name on the tombstone. But he could see the pain in the man's posture, the way his hands clenched into fists, the way he exhaled like he was trying to keep himself from breaking apart. And then, just as the millionaire was about to look away, something happened. The ex-prisoner reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. The millionaire couldn't see what it was at first, but the moment the man placed it on the grave, the air seemed to shift. The wind stilled, the night grew quieter, as if the world itself had paused to witness this moment. The millionaire's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He had seen many things in his life, deals made in dark rooms, fortunes gained and lost, the way people changed when money was involved. But this was different. This was personal. Something told him that what he had just witnessed was only the beginning. The millionaire sat frozen in his car, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He should have driven away. This wasn't his business. And yet something about the way the man knelt at the grave, the silent weight of his grief, held him there. His fingers hovered over the door handle. He hesitated, caught between logic and instinct. The ex-prisoner remained still for a long time. The small object he had placed on the grave glinted faintly under the moonlight. The millionaire squinted, trying to make out what it was. A token, a photograph, a letter. Whatever it was, it clearly meant something. Then, as if sensing he was being watched, the man suddenly looked up. His eyes, dark and sharp, swept over the empty cemetery before locking onto the car in the distance. The millionaire felt a jolt of panic. He had no reason to be afraid. He was just an observer. but the intensity in the other man's stare made his breath catch. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. The cemetery was silent, the night stretched between them like a thin wire about to snap. Then just as suddenly, the ex-prisoner stood up, turned, and walked away. The millionaire should have let him go. He should have started the engine, driven off, and let the moment fade into nothing. But he couldn't. Something deep inside him refused to let this night end without answers. Without thinking, he opened the car door and stepped out. The cold air hit him instantly, but he barely noticed. His eyes were locked on the grave, on the object left behind. He walked forward, his expensive shoes crunching against the gravel. Every step felt heavier, as if he were walking toward something he wasn't ready to face. When he reached the grave, his breath caught in his throat. The name on the tombstone sent a shockwave through his body. He knew that name. It belonged to a man he had once crossed paths with years ago. A man who had changed the course of many lives, including, it seemed, the one who had just walked away. His hands trembled slightly as he looked down at the object left on the grave. It was a simple, worn-out photograph. A younger version of the ex-prisoner stood beside the man buried here, both smiling, both unaware of what life had in store for them. The millionaire swallowed hard. He knew now that this wasn't just about grief. This was about something bigger, something unfinished. Behind him, footsteps echoed against the stillness. He turned, heart-hammering. The ex-prisoner stood just a few feet away, watching him carefully. His face was unreadable, but his eyes carried a weight that spoke louder than words. "You shouldn't be here," the man said, his voice low but steady. Neither of them moved. The millionaire considered his next words carefully. He could walk away, pretend he had never seen any of this. But something told him that if he left now, he'd never be able to shake this feeling, this night, this moment. "Who was he to you?" he finally asked. The ex-prisoner's jaw tightened. For a long time, he didn't answer. Then finally, he exhaled. "He was my brother." The words hung heavy in the air. The millionaire felt a strange sense of guilt settle in his chest. He didn't know this man's story, but he knew enough to understand that whatever had happened, it hadn't ended the way it should have. He took a step closer. What happened to him? The ex-prisoner's expression darkened. "You really want to know?" His voice held something dangerous beneath the surface. A challenge. The millionaire hesitated. Then slowly he nodded. For the first time, the ex-prisoner looked at him fully, as if deciding whether or not to trust him. Finally, he spoke. "He died because of a choice I made." The weight of those words was enough to send a chill down the millionaire's spine. He didn't know what had happened yet, but he could feel it, the storm that was coming, the truth that had yet to be told. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he knew he needed to hear it. The millionaire stood in the cold night air, his pulse steady but his mind racing. The ex-prisoner's words hung between them like an unspoken challenge. He had admitted it. His brother had died because of a choice he made. But what choice? What had happened? And why did it feel like this night was changing something in both of them? The ex-prisoner took a slow breath, his gaze locked onto the grave. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, almost as if he were speaking more to himself than to the millionaire, he began. "We grew up with nothing," he said, his voice rough but steady. "Our parents were gone before we were even old enough to understand what loss meant. It was just me and him against the world. He was the good one, the one who kept us together, the one who believed in something better. And me? I was the one always looking for the shortcut, the easy way out." The millionaire stayed silent, letting the man speak. "I got mixed up with the wrong people," the ex-prisoner continued. "At first, it was small things things that didn't seem like they would matter in the long run. But one bad decision led to another, and before I knew it, I was in deep. Too deep. His hands clenched into fists. The pain in his voice was real, raw. My brother tried to pull me out, told me to walk away before it was too late. But I didn't listen. I thought I had it all figured out. I thought I was smarter than the people I was dealing with. He let out a bitter laugh. I wasn't. The millionaire could feel the tension building, the weight of what was coming. One night, everything fell apart. The ex-prisoner said, his voice barely above a whisper now. I was supposed to meet someone for a deal. My brother, he found out, and he tried to stop me. He showed up, got in the way. And the people I was dealing with, they didn't care who he was. They just saw a problem. He swallowed hard. They took his life, right in front of me. His voice broke on the last word, but he quickly pulled himself together. And the worst part, I wasn't even the one who paid for it. I was the one who walked away. I was the one who got arrested for something completely different months later. But him, he was gone, and I never even got to say goodbye. The cemetery felt even quieter now, as if the night itself had paused to listen. The millionaire didn't know what to say. What could he say? He had spent his life in boardrooms and behind closed doors, making decisions that shaped businesses, fortunes. But he had never stood in front of someone carrying this kind of guilt. The ex-prisoner exhaled slowly. I come here because it's the only thing I can do. I lost years in prison, but even if I hadn't, I don't think I'd ever be free from what happened. He glanced at the millionaire. You don't know me. You don't know me anything. But now you know why I'm here. The millionaire nodded slowly. He had come here tonight by accident, by chance. Or maybe not. Maybe something had led him here for a reason. He looked down at the grave, then back at the man standing beside him. You made a mistake, he finally said. A terrible one. But you're still standing. You're still here. The ex-prisoner let out a quiet breath. And what do I do with that? The millionaire thought for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small card, and handed it over. The ex-prisoner frowned, taking it cautiously. My number, the millionaire said. You ever decide you want a second chance to do something with the time you have left, you call me. The ex-prisoner looked down at the card, then back at him. Why? The millionaire hesitated. Then he glanced at the grave one last time before meeting the man's eyes. Because I know what it's like to live with regrets. The two men stood there for a moment longer, the night wrapping around them, heavy but not unbearable. Then, without another word, the millionaire turned and walked away. The ex-prisoner stayed behind, staring at the card in his hand. He didn't know if he would ever call. But for the first time in a long time, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope.